Madam President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Madam President, I seek unanimous consent to speak for a period of...
The Senate is in a quorum call.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that I be able to speak for a...
Without objection.
Period of 5 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, and maybe for those who were watching the opening prayer, that was Pastor Andrew Brunson from North Carolina. Pastor Brunson, this month marks a year since he was released from a Turkish prison. And he and his wife were swept up, and his wife Noreen is in the gallery as well. They were swept up in what I consider to be an overreaction by President Erdogan and the Turkish regime, imprisoning thousands of people after the coup attempt in Turkey. I found out about this case, actually first as casework. Pastor Brunson was from North Carolina, and then slowly but steadily, diplomacy wasn't working. And he found himself in a Turkish prison, at one point really in what we would consider to be despicable circumstances, in a prison cell designed for maybe 8 or 10 people that had more than 20 in it, none of them speaking English language. Now, Pastor Brunson was a missionary in Turkey for almost 20 years. He had a church in Izmir where all they tried to do for those who wanted to hear the Word of God is to speak it. For that, he was ultimately incarcerated and accused of being a part of the Turkish coup attempt. And then it was about a year later that they issued an indictment for him, a 62-page indictment that read like a horrible fictional novel. Some of the most absurd allegations you could possibly imagine, certainly things that wouldn't keep you in jail overnight in the United States, that were potentially going to have Pastor Brunson convicted and spend 35 years in a Turkish prison. We got word back that after the indictment was issued against Pastor Brunson, that he was afraid that the American people were going to believe it and that we would simply move on and he'd be left there at the fate of the Turkish judiciary. When I heard that, the first thing I told my staff is I've got to go to Turkey. I want to go to the prison that Pastor Brunson was in. Got the opportunity to meet his wife Noreen the day before. And I went there and I told Pastor Brunson across the table, about as wide as this desk is, that we're not going to forget you and we're not going to stop until we get you released from prison. I then had a series of efforts here that I have to really compliment all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. More than 72 senators signed on to a letter encouraging Pastor Brunson's release. More than 100 House members signed on to a similar letter. We did everything that we could diplomatically to get Pastor Brunson released. I decided I wanted to see how the court case was going, so I went back to Turkey a few months after I first met Pastor Brunson in the prison, and I sat through 12 hours of so-called Turkish justice. I saw this man stand before the eyes of 3 judges and a prosecutor, where basically you're assumed guilty until you prove innocence. His defense attorney was as far away from him as that wall. That's Turkish justice. That's not anything that we could imagine in this country, but that's what this man was subjected to. But over the course of several months, working with the president, working with Secretary Pompeo, Vice President, and a number of other people, we were able to get President Erdogan to recognize that this was a political exercise. It was not an exercise in justice, and he needed to be released. So a year ago this month, he was released. And now he's opening the prayer, the Senate in prayer. I want to thank Pastor Brunson for his perseverance. He went through things that most of us could not imagine. And Noreen, who is his strongest advocate, I see the parliamentarian looking at me as if I'm not supposed to recognize the fact that Noreen Brunson's in the gallery. So I will not recognize that fact because that would be a violation of the rules. But they are a sight for sore eyes, and I'm so glad to have them back in this country. And I know that they're going to continue their missionary work wherever they can. I thank them for their leadership and their deep faith, and thank you for opening the Senate today. Madam President, I yield the floor and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.